News here. My favourite royal, Prince Louis, is making headlines again.
Prince Louis is stealing the show at Trooping the Color once again. And in case you missed the young prince adorably stealing hearts, here's a look.
Prince Louis stepped forward expecting smiles and polite applause, but instead delivered a remark so unexpected it seemed to drain the air from the palace terrace, halting cheers mid-sound and triggering a chain reaction few in the crowd noticed but many behind the scenes felt immediately. What was meant to be a familiar royal tableau unfolded under clear spring skies, carefully designed to reassure the public, project unity, and offer a composed glimpse of the monarchy's future. Prince William stood steady and assured, Catherine moved with practiced grace, Prince George held himself with quiet discipline, and Princess Charlotte appeared confident and at ease with the attention. Prince Louis, energetic and curious, delighted openly in the waving flags and sea of faces before him, until a subtle shift caught the attention of those closest to the family. Instead of remaining in place, his focus drifted toward the guards stationed along the red carpet's edge, and with the unfiltered confidence only a child possesses, he gently tugged free from his aide and stepped forward. What followed lasted only seconds but carried immediate weight. Leaning toward a guard, Louis whispered something too soft for the crowd to hear, prompting the guard to bend slightly to listen, before the young prince spoke again, this time clearly enough for nearby aides to catch fragments. The reaction was instant and unmistakable. The guard's posture stiffened, his jaw tightened, and his gaze shifted sharply toward a senior palace aide, while another guard quietly raised a hand to his communication device. To the public, nothing appeared amiss, but behind the scenes the rhythm changed. Movements became sharper, formations subtly adjusted, and calm gave way to controlled urgency. Catherine noticed at once, moving toward her son with measured speed and placing a reassuring yet firm hand on his shoulder, her composed expression briefly slipping into concern before being carefully restored. She spoke softly, guiding Louis back into position, while Prince William observed the exchange and offered a brief nod. No words exchanged, but understanding clear. Witnesses later described the tension as palpable, as a moment meant to be light and ceremonial suddenly carried an edge that could not be ignored. Within minutes, a decision was made to shorten the appearance, ending it several minutes ahead of schedule. The departure sequence changed, the motorcade moved faster than planned, and security visibly tightened as the family returned to the palace. Officially, nothing was said, and publicly the moment passed as routine, yet within the palace walls questions lingered. What could a 5-year-old have said to prompt such a swift, coordinated response? And why did that single sentence unsettle a system built on centuries of silence and control? The shift from public smiles to private concern became unmistakable once Prince Louis was escorted inside, where aides initially assumed the tension would dissolve into harmless confusion. Instead, protocol took over. A specially trained aide knelt beside him and gently asked him to repeat what he had said to the guard. There was no hesitation. Louis repeated the sentence calmly and clearly, and as the words settled, the room fell into a heavy silence. Catherine, standing nearby, visibly recognized something in that moment, her reaction not one of panic but of understanding, as though the words echoed something she never expected to hear spoken aloud, least of all by her youngest child. Without explanation, she quietly left the room. According to palace insiders, the phrase bore striking resemblance to language contained within a highly restricted internal security briefing, known only to a narrow circle within palace intelligence. The similarity was precise enough to trigger immediate concern, prompting the chief of palace security to initiate a confidential protocol and quietly raise the internal alert level to Tier 31, a measure reserved not for misunderstandings but for moments when troubling patterns begin to align. Behind closed doors, patrols were discreetly rerouted, secure communication channels were reinforced, and senior analysts reviewed access logs, surveillance footage, and internal movements from the previous 48 hours, while Prince Louis was escorted to a secure playroom, surrounded by familiar faces and comforts, entirely unaware of the response his words had set in motion. To him, nothing had changed, but within the palace, the sentence refused to remain small, lingering as a quiet reminder that even the most controlled institutions can be unsettled by the unfiltered honesty of a child. But for the adults watching closely, everything had changed, because what unsettled them most was not merely what Prince Louis had said, but the calm certainty with which he said it, as though he was stating an obvious fact rather than voicing something deeply troubling. And at the center of the growing concern was a single sentence that began circulating quietly through palace corridors and security briefings alike: "They are watching from the walls." As analysts worked and senior aides exchanged guarded looks, a deeper question emerged: one that challenged long-held assumptions about privacy, security, and what a child could possibly perceive in a place engineered around secrecy, while the palace outwardly maintained composure and inwardly braced for what those words might truly signify. How could a 5-year-old repeat language that echoed decades-old secrets? And what unseen presence could possibly exist within walls that had been fortified for centuries? As the security teams worked late into the evening, a disturbing realization surfaced within the command wing. The phrase Prince Louis had calmly repeated was not something anyone should have recognized. Yet records confirmed it had appeared once before in a tightly sealed internal briefing from 2002, compiled during the later years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, a report never made public and written in fragmented, coded language referencing an unexplained security irregularity within royal living quarters. The phrase had been labeled a lexical anomaly, an expression with no known origin, and the fact that a child could repeat it in the same context defied conventional explanation. While analysts combed through access logs and timelines, Catherine withdrew into her private quarters, where she moved an armchair gifted to her years earlier by the late Queen herself, revealing a concealed compartment she had hoped never to open. Inside lay a thin envelope, its seal faded, bearing a single word written in a careful hand, Clarion, a name never spoken aloud and known only to Catherine and the Queen. She read the contents quickly, destroyed the pages completely, and returned to the command wing moments later, her voice calm but resolute as she issued a directive that unsettled those present. The East Wing corridor must be monitored again. Across London, Prince William was attending a military charity engagement when his secure phone vibrated in a precise coded pattern he recognized instantly, prompting him to leave without explanation, his abrupt departure noticed and recorded by onlookers. By the time his vehicle reached the palace gates, multiple stairwells had been sealed and trace scans were underway, despite nothing concrete having been found, as instinct alone had activated one of the oldest response systems still embedded within royal protocol. Unease spread quietly among senior staff, some of whom remembered similar wording decades earlier, never spoken aloud, and that unease deepened when it was confirmed that Prince Louis's statement did not stand alone. A nearly identical phrase had once appeared in Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother's final private correspondence to the royal archives, written, reviewed, and deliberately removed from official records, preserved only in a restricted chamber beneath her personal crest. Among those documents was a letter long dismissed as symbolic reflection, titled simply A Consideration of Unseen Observers, once brushed aside as metaphor from another era. Yet when the senior archivist retrieved the sole untouched physical copy that night, a line blacked out in every public version stood fully visible, reading not as poetry but as warning. There are those within our own walls who do not serve the crown, but watch it, patiently waiting. In that moment, when a child's words echoed language buried in sealed archives, what had once been dismissed as superstition demanded renewed scrutiny, and ancient concerns long relegated to sentiment resurfaced with unsettling relevance. The archives team prepared a sealed memorandum for the Lord Chamberlain, bypassing standard procedures, recognizing this was no longer idle curiosity but an immediate matter of institutional concern, particularly given that the Queen Mother's writings had been penned only months before her death during a period when her clarity was unquestioned. As the past appeared to echo into the present, the palace faced a chilling possibility that some secrets, however deeply buried, have a way of resurfacing through the most unexpected voices. What had once been dismissed as metaphor now returned with unsettling clarity, forcing the royal household to confront questions it had long buried. Beginning with why a matriarch as disciplined and exacting as the Queen Mother would ever speak of unseen watchers and internal threats within her own walls. Years earlier, even Princess Anne, known for her practicality and lack of sentimentality, had privately asked about those writings and had been given the same reassurance that they were emotional farewells shaped by symbolism rather than literal warning. Yet when Prince Louis's words resurfaced decades later, witnesses recalled and falling silent, her expression hardening as recognition replaced dismissal. For a family that guards its history with clinical precision, this convergence of past and present was not coincidence but ignition, reviving conversations the palace had deliberately avoided and forcing ancient protocols, archived intelligence, and cryptic references once labeled poetic into serious reconsideration. Inside the command wing, staff began cross-referencing documents never previously linked, pulling security plans, private correspondence, and restricted briefings into a single review as whispers spread of patterns long overlooked, phrases once seemed harmless in isolation now forming a web too precise to ignore. While the palace maintained its outward serenity, internally it moved into heightened alert, unsettled by the realization that a simple sentence spoken by a 5-year-old had bridged generations and reawakened shadows of the monarchy's own past. Attention soon turned quietly toward Catherine, whose calm composure and unusual familiarity with royal history placed her at the center of the unfolding concern. particularly given her symbolic access to a concealed chamber within Windsor known as the Blue Room, a hidden archive reserved for future queens and custodians of the crown's legacy. Within its velvet-lined drawers lay diaries and personal records spanning centuries, including a stitched leather case containing Queen Victoria's private journals. One entry from 1852 describing an incident in which her youngest son spoke of unseen watchers and moving shadows within the East Wing, language he could not have learned and which left Victoria deeply unsettled despite her measured tone. The phrasing, the child's calm certainty, and the precise locations described mirrored Prince Louis's recent words with chilling accuracy, a parallel Catherine had hesitated to fully share for fear of appearing paranoid, until her own son repeated nearly identical language. As palace officials struggled to contain the growing tension, control slipped when an anonymous whistleblower leaked a classified incident report to the press, igniting global headlines that claimed Prince Louis had echoed language drawn from restricted royal security files. The palace's calculated silence, offering neither denial nor clarification, only intensified scrutiny, especially after journalists confirmed the phrasing aligned with dormant Omega protocols and an internal operation once known as Obsidian Key, terminology buried for decades within classified threat simulations. By mid-morning, senior guards present during the original incident were summoned for questioning, as the monarchy confronted a reality it could no longer dismiss. Words long hidden in sealed archives had resurfaced through the most unexpected voice, and silence itself had become the loudest signal of all. The inquiries were conducted discreetly, yet word spread rapidly through royal circles. And days later one of the questioned guards resigned without explanation, a departure that followed protocol on paper but whose timing spoke volumes to seasoned observers, signaling that something within the palace structure had shifted. Speculation intensified over whether the leak had been an act of conscience, a warning, or evidence of internal division finally surfacing, because the convergence was impossible to ignore: a child's words, centuries-old documents, dormant security language, and now a breach from within the guard itself. Any one of these elements might have been dismissed in isolation, but together they formed a pattern too precise to overlook. As the media storm grew and the palace maintained its silence, it became clear this was no longer about a single remark made in public, but about something deeper within the monarchy, something carefully maintained and rigidly controlled, beginning to fracture and reveal layers few were ever meant to see. By the morning following the leak, Windsor and Kensington moved with quiet urgency as aides followed protocol with sharpened tension, while Prince Louis was quietly withdrawn from all scheduled appearances and Catherine remained largely out of sight, immersed in private consultations, document reviews, and continuous security briefings. The Wales household was no longer merely managing public attention but bracing for an internal reckoning that threatened the institution's balance. Media coverage escalated beyond expectation, with tabloids, international broadcasters, and online forums debating whether the youngest prince was an innocent voice cutting through decades of secrecy or an unwitting signal of something far more troubling, while public fascination split between those who saw him as a symbol of unfiltered truth and those who feared his words hinted at dangers long buried in diaries, letters, and classified files. Tensions spilled beyond security teams into family dynamics, with reports of heated confrontations among senior figures and growing suspicion over shifting influence within the palace, exposing divisions shaped by resentment and mistrust rather than hierarchy alone. Even Parliament began to stir, as opposition lawmakers called for inquiry into potential national security implications, questioning how sensitive language could surface publicly and whether palace secrecy itself had masked long-standing vulnerabilities. As political pressure mounted and the narrative spread globally, the story took on a life of its own, with commentators drawing lines between Prince Louis's words and warnings found in the writings of Queen Victoria and the Queen Mother, while analysts debated the implications of a child repeating phrasing aligned with decades-old security protocols. Amid overlapping crises of media scrutiny, internal strain, and historical echoes, one truth became undeniable. The story had outgrown the palace walls. A simple sentence spoken by a 5-year-old had become a catalyst for reckoning, collapsing distance between past and present, innocence and authority, curiosity and caution. Every movement within the palace now carried the sense of fragile equilibrium, and Catherine's role, once seen as ceremonial, had quietly become central, as she appeared uniquely positioned to interpret the coded language of history and the significance of her son's words. As debates raged outside and tension mounted within, the monarchy faced a question it had long avoided. What truths lay dormant within its corridors, waiting for an unexpected voice to awaken them, and could a child truly echo secrets buried for generations?